work where she included a different lens on how to analyze data. And then we have Ellen Anthony doing a second seminar and taking as a topic reflection, a meta-reflection on her own work, coming from the position of a practitioner researcher, so very different topics. The main goal of this seminar series or doctoral seminars, for those who are new to the concept, is that the scholars present some ongoing work, obviously also unfinished work, and that we would invite critical questions or constructive input on what they present for them, that enables them to actually improve their research trajectory. So we're going to have Lynn speaking for approximately or maximum 30 minutes, and then we have like 15 minutes left for discussion. I think what Teresa mentioned is probably a good rule for all of us. So if we're not speaking, we can best mute our microphone so that the speakers are at ease in terms of the background noise. Lynn and Ellen, I propose that when you are presenting that you would share your screen with the rest, and hopefully that all goes well. Lynn, I'm going to give you the floor first. So I'm going to mute my microphone. I'll be coming back once you're done with your presentation. All right?
Okay. Thank you. Let me just share my slides again. I think someone else is sharing their screen.
That's apparently my screen, right? Why would I'm sorry, why would I?
That's okay.
That's okay. Oh no, it shouldn't be there. But I didn't tick anything about sharing. Is it?
Can you try again?
Yes, it's starting.
Yes, it's starting now. So it means there's nothing bothering from my side anymore?
No.
Okay, good. Sorry for that.
Okay. So it should be visible now?
It is.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody see the screen quite clearly?
Yes, perfect.
I can't, but I'll open it on a different computer then so that I can follow.
Okay.
Hannah doesn't see it either. Okay. Can it be shared? So Hannah, you don't have any visible, and other people?
I see in the chat that most people can see it.
Okay, so it's only Hannah and myself, so I'll share your presentation with Hannah then, Lynn, because you sent it previously to me. And then you...
Okay, so let's get started. Prof. Hannes, can I please switch off your video because it's blocking my screen?
Okay.
Thank you. Nazrin says you have to change the layout view top right of the screen to presenter view, and then I can see all of it. Top right. Okay, so I'm just going to get going. If everybody's mics is off and videos are off, just to save some bandwidth and to make sure this runs smoothly. So like Prof. Hannes said today, I'm going to be sharing an update of my PhD work. One aspect of my work is the systematic review I'm working on. So I don't know if Susan is on this call, but Susan van Wyk supported me during this review. She helped me with the screening and with the critical appraisal and the data extraction. So I just want to acknowledge her from the very beginning on working with me on this review, and then also my supervisors around the conceptualization and the protocol of the review, Prof. Hannes and Prof. Young and Prof. Mathei. What we are doing in this review, which is a little bit different, or I haven't seen it in a review thus far, is we are trying to look at how we integrate the material perspective into the data and how we understand the data. So if you don't know what that means yet, that is okay. I am going to explain it a little bit in the following slides. And try to show you some actual extracts that I've been working with and how I managed to include it. So it wasn't an easy process. We were learning as we were going, and I was definitely learning the most because I'm also new to new materialism and the concepts and the theories around it. And I will show you the journey that the theoretical model took and how it unfolded over time. So the aims of the actual review was to explore the lived experiences of young people who were perinatally infected with HIV or were infected with HIV before the age of 10 years old in low to middle income countries. We applied the biopsychosocial model, but we added an extension of the new materialism lens. We included only qualitative studies. We only included studies that we found in the review search. We screened the reference lists of included studies, and we also looked at the grey literature to see what we could include. We did the first search in 2018, and we updated the search in January 2020. So it's quite a comprehensive set of studies that we have included. This particular presentation, in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I'm going to illustrate how we applied the lens to our qualitative evidence. Just before we get going, this review doesn't focus on one particular area on the HIV cascade, but rather the entire lived experience. So it will include things like testing, linkage, adherence to treatment, retention in care, how young people were disclosed to about their HIV status, and then also a lot of studies, as you will see, focused on the lived experience in the qualitative study. So I started out my theoretical modeling by looking at existing socio-behavioral models that have been applied particularly to HIV research. I then mapped it out. So this table I think I did at the very beginning of this review in the protocol phase. And what I was interested to see was which of the theories took into account the environments. So this is the actual physical eco-environment where the person finds themselves in. And if you look on the table in front of you, there are 5 existing socio-behavioral models that introduce the environment into HIV adherence research. At the same time, during this time period, I think it was about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, I was involved in 2 HIV reviews. The one was an overview of systematic reviews of qualitative studies, and the other one was a qualitative systematic review, and both were on the same topic, looking at barriers and facilitators of HIV linkage, treatment adherence, and retention in care. What I found in those papers that we included into both those studies, that not a lot of them applied the environment, maybe not any, applied the environment into their modeling and into their conceptual framework. Their frameworks and their models were really focused on the individual perspective and relationships with other people. So this is the model that, the conceptual model that came out of the qualitative review that I just spoke about. And if you look at this model, it is very comprehensive. What we found in this model is that there was a tipping point that led people in and out of art adherence, and there were internal motivating factors and also external influences. And these factors worked in both directions. So support could either lead to engagement, or support or lack of support could lead to disengagement. But looking at this model, which is comprehensive, we still don't see the influence of the environment. We do see something around poverty. I know in the codes and the themes we had codes around transport and distance to the clinic. We had side effects of the medication, but when it came to putting the themes and the model together, these kind of fell away and they weren't really emphasized in the model. And so when we look at materiality in HIV research, I try to define it as simply the concept of materiality is when we focus our attention on the impact or the agency of material and physical factors. This is something we can all relate to at the moment. If you think about the COVID-19 pandemic and the effect of the lockdown, staying in your homes, how your home has had an effect on your mental health and well-being, how when you see things sitting around the house, you find it hard to concentrate at work. If you think about just the things in your physical space right now, and you just look around the room and look at the things that are sitting and lying around, they are not just things. Those things have meaning, and those things have an effect on how you relate to the environment around you. And if we take that example and we move it into HIV research, I've illustrated some pictures that I was cued to select based on the data on material elements that could affect how people engage with the HIV cascade. So we have things like people's physical surroundings, their houses, where their houses are positioned, what the roads look like around their house, the distance from their house to the clinic, what they may see on the route from the house to the clinic. The second picture illustrates the pill bottle. And one of the studies I've included, which I will speak about later, they did a little experiment with adolescents looking at how they engage with different pill bottle and color sizes. We can also think about when people go for their HIV test or when they draw the blood and people see their blood outside of their body and the meaning that they ascribe to that. I have a picture of a girl that's been laughed at and bullied by her peers, which is something that young people often experience. Skin rashes, markings in the faces are some of the common side effects of some of the drugs that people have to take. And then the actual medication, the look, the size, the feel, do you use the injectable, what color is your pill, how big is it, how many do you have to take. All of these material objects create meaning and have an effect on our interactions and our decision making. So what I'm trying to illustrate in this diagram is that we have all these different factors happening around us. The blues, the yellows, the greens, they all represent different things constantly happening in our spaces and in our spheres. So for example, you have your family relationships, you have your cultural norms, you have your health and well-being, you have your career and work, you have financial responsibilities, you have children, and then you also have things, your car, your house, the food, the stuff standing around in your living room, your TV, your books, but everything in your space, in your sphere, is constantly connecting, engaging, interacting, and working across one another. What we are trying to do in this review is position the human among the non-human agents or actors We focus on the material realities for humans and non-humans alike. So we're really trying to take the human out of the center and look at the whole picture, including the human in the bigger scope and in the bigger frame. So let's move to the review and see how we did that. This is my Prisma flowchart for the review. This is the first results that we get out of the systematic review. And as you can see, we had 1,059 records identified. And I must mention that Nico also helped with the screening of our abstracts in the very first step around identification. After we removed all the duplicates that we found in the search, we then screened 996, of which we excluded 883 abstracts, and we were left with 113 full-text articles for eligibility. We excluded full-text articles with reason. There were 59 of them, and we were left with 56 articles to include in the review. Please keep in mind, this is with the update. So at the first search in 2018, we had 23 included studies, and when we updated the search 2 years later, we have now 56 studies. On the left-hand side of the screen, you will see that I have placed which area on the HIV care path the articles respond to. So most of the articles are looking at treatment adherence, and the second largest group is looking at the lived experience. We have one article around how adolescents or young people transition to adult care within the clinic, and then we have 9 articles looking at retention in care, 2 at testing, 3 at linkage, and 4 at how young people were disclosed to about their serostatus or how they experience disclosure in their relationships or with their peers. So here I've mapped the results of the studies. I've put the world map there to show the low to upper middle income countries that were included. So we have some over here from Thailand. We had a large proportion from Uganda. I think that was our highest proportion. The second largest was from South Africa. And then we had some from Brazil. We had some from DRC, Rwanda. There were quite a few African countries that were included in this 56 papers. What I also found interesting when looking at the papers that we included, the amount of research really increased in the year 2017-2018, with 9 publications focusing specifically on perinatal infections. We didn't find that many in 2019. We only included 2 articles, and our 2020 is low because we only searched up to January 2020. Our total amount of participants we included, we had just under 2,000 HIV positive perinatal perinatally infected young people. So this is between the ages of 10 and 25. We included 836 caregivers, 264 healthcare workers, and then we also have knowledge, key informants, and then teachers. Some of the papers did include HIV negative adolescents because they were doing comparative analysis between HIV positive and HIV negative. But not a lot of papers. There were only 2 that did that. It's important for us to identify these participants so that we can check whether the reviews we included matches what we searched for. But also part of this review is also to conduct a subgroup analysis at the very end to see if there are differences in the factors that people report along the HIV cascade. Then another thing, exercise I did before I got to the analysis of the papers, I marked the studies as thick or thin. So when I looked at thick papers, I'm looking for, does the study provide enough methodological detail? So this is not the critical appraisal. This is just a step for me to assist with what order I do the data analysis in. Does the study have enough methodological detail? Is the the data supporting the conclusions that the authors make? Does the author provide a conceptual model either before or develop a conceptual model? And then just the overall essence of the paper. I can see whether it's a thick or a thin paper. So using that, most of the 13 of the studies were considered thick papers, and 40 of the studies were considered thin. And when I mean thin, I mean really thin. It was like 3 pages long, or it was 2 pages. Then you can imagine in a paper like that, you don't really get to the essence of the issue or the experience. Then there were 2 papers that I called medium thick. And I called it medium thick because it wasn't exactly thick, meeting all the criteria I had, but it offered new information, or it offered something that I haven't yet seen in the literature that needs to be included in the analysis. So the order in which I analyzed the data is I started with the thick papers to help me with the creating of the themes, because I used a very inductive approach, even though I had categories from the framework, and then I moved to the medium thick and then to the thin papers. So let's look at the framework and how it evolved. So this is where I started. This was the diagram that was in my very first protocol, and what I proposed in this diagram is that we have the biopsychosocial model. And usually it's presented with circles that fit around one another. I try to move away from that into a more interrelated space. And what I did here is add the material ring. So as you can see, these dimensions, I'm calling them, they are 4. And the little blue ball is how the factors are spinning around and rotating within the dimension and between the dimensions. So this is where it began. Later, I started becoming more detailed in the diagram, because what happened when I first started reading the papers, I realized that even though some of the papers applied the biopsychosocial model, the elements that they placed within each of the dimensions were different across the studies. So then I had to define my dimensions even further, and I started moving different groupings of themes or categories into my dimension, so that I could neatly place the new codes I find into these dimensions. So then I further explored the political to include the healthcare system, policies. Then I took the social dimension and I included relationships, family relationships, schools, which is a big area of work for adolescents, culture, socio-economic status. In psychology, I put motivations, beliefs, experiences, perceptions, attitudes. And in biology, I listed it as treatment response, genetics, and symptoms. And I left the material dimension there around matter and space. So this is how the data analysis database looked like, and this is just one theme from one paper. And I initially listed the categories as I had the dimensions. The social category I broke up into education and relationships, and then at the very end I had the material marker. So I would write all the themes, and then I would just list the material elements that I saw in the paper. After doing this for a couple of themes, just from 2 or 3 papers, I wasn't really getting the essence of how the material elements interacted with the themes and the other factors that the data was presenting. It wasn't really getting to the agency by just listing the objects. So then I rethought how I was doing my data. And here's an example. We'll start here and then I will show you the final model. So here's an example of the theme in acted stigma and where I extracted a material element. Let me just make this a bit bigger. So when they are at school, we have been informed that some of them have to hide, and these are the young, so these are boys between the ages of 12 to 16. They have to hide and take their medication in the toilet. So the toilet is the material space, the place, it's the object. And I want you in your mind, when you think of a toilet, what do you think of? All of us is going to have very different pictures. But I Googled, this was in Kenya. I Googled school toilets, Kenya. And this was in a rural area. If it's anything like rural area toilets in South Africa at schools, it's not a pretty place. And then I tried to think about what it must be like for a young person to be hiding in a toilet that's probably dirty, it's smelly, and they have to hide from their friends during their breaks to take their pills because they don't want to be stigmatized, they don't want to be have accidental disclosures, they don't want to be made fun of. And how is that different? How does that experience feel different from someone taking the tablet in a kitchen or outside? It's going to give a different feeling, and that remembered feeling and that remembered experience is going to influence how the person acts afterwards. So then space is more than just it being a toilet and listing it as a toilet item, is actually starting to attach the meaning or the agency of the place and the space to the behavior, to the health behavior. My next example is around stress and anxiety. So this paper was around mental health of adolescents. It says your mind is not settled, you're thinking about many problems, you get stressed. Like, where do you get school fees if your parents die? How will you live without your parents? You know, living a life without parents is hell. Therefore, when you're thinking about such problems, you become stressed. So here, the parents are the object. They are, and what I want to illustrate in this is that the material element has agency in its presence and in its absence. So many of the adolescents in the review were orphaned, almost half of them, either by one parent or both parents. But their parents that they knew also had agency, and the thought of them being missing is also an important concept. And I think this one we are still trying to tease out in the review. So this is one of the tricky ones we are still working with, about the absence of material things rather than its presence. And I summarize this as stress and anxiety is manifested through the absence of the material, parents no longer there, and no money for food and for school. So here, quickly, some examples of how I connected some themes. These are not all, I'm just illustrating some of them. So the one theme is under the bio dimension is changes in the body. So these people mention things like rashes, hair loss, looking more attractive to their partner, which made their relationship better. So they wanted to go back and get their medication at the clinic. They looked physically stronger. They didn't look weak. I also put hunger there because they spoke about their stomachs, and the food was a big issue. And if they can't eat, they can't take their medication. On the psychological domain, around motivation, one of the studies mentioned condoms as a protective measure for sex, but not only to prevent pregnancy, but to prevent infections to their partners. So that motivated them to live healthier and to be healthier and to engage in healthier behaviors. Internal stigma was very much linked to physical appearance, where people said because they see their hair falling out, they feel bad about themselves. They spoke about being the whole world becomes a box, feeling trapped. Lots of incidences of depression and suicidal ideations have come out in the papers, and people are quite graphic around how they express their depression and anxiety. We had some themes around places in the community that were linked to hope, like church or a mosque. The romantic partner, about their bodies and meaning when it comes to sex, fear of disclosure around the medication, and then political was actually the healthcare worker, beliefs about the clinic space, and then traveling and the route to the clinic and type of transport that people had to take. So this is the final model and what it actually ended up looking like. This is where we are now. So as you can see, I've deleted the material as a dimension, and I've rather put the material integrated within each dimension because the material is needed to elicit the meanings of the experience. So what has worked, it was a struggle for me to review and adjust my thinking around listing objects, and rather to work towards meaning making and the interactions between the material and the human. And I feel like the papers I've looked at over the last 2 or 3 years now around HIV research has touched on the material, and it's evident in the papers, but theoretically the meanings and the relationships have not been created or teased out in the conceptual models. Only 2 papers I found actually studied the multisensory components of the pill, and the other one spoke about materialism. Only 6 out of the 56 included studies presented a conceptual model, even though more than half of them use the grounded theory approach, which is a missed opportunity. And there's definitely a gap in the research that includes the material in our understanding of health behaviors. So in conclusion, the value add of materialism to the study of HIV changes the way we view healthcare and the phenomena, pushes the boundaries and existing theories on adherence. We must move towards a more transdisciplinary framework and way of thinking. It influenced the ways of thinking from problem, explore, solution with a causal outcome to a more what is the bigger picture and how do these factors interact with one another. And it further explores structural factors and its impact on the HIV care treatment cascade. So the next steps for me now is to complete the analysis of all the 56 papers, then to conduct the subgroup analysis by age, gender, and perspective, so who the participant is, and then to further refine the model and the inter and interaction across the dimensions. So thank you very much everyone for joining in my presentation. Just like to thank the funders from Global Minds at KU Leuven and Stellenbosch University and the Reader Project for supporting time to develop and implement this review project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lynn. Hopefully I'm back in sound and image now. Let me open up the floor for questions. And I want to, invite the public in here first. So anyone who wants to jump in, just activate your microphone, or you can use the chat box next to the screen and we'll pick it up from there. Anyone who wants to start?
I can if there's no one else. So it's Teresa speaking. Thank you very much, Lynn. It was extremely interesting. Also because of the fact that part of my research is also studying ecological factors. And you mentioned in the very beginning of your talk that the first qualitative research you did on it, when you screened papers or models on external ecological factors, you didn't come up with a lot of papers even considering markers of environment. This is something that I can actually confirm in my research as well. I work on the area of breastfeeding support programs, and I'm currently in the stage of data extraction, and I didn't come across many markers of environment as well in that particular area. So that strikes me as very interesting. What came up as a question is that you mentioned you repeated your search 2 years after you first ran it in 2018, and then you had more than double of papers all of a sudden included that did come up with markers of environment. And I was interested if you have any idea of what happened in these 2 years, because I think that's quite a lot in just a very short time. Is there any idea why that is so? Is there more awareness all of a sudden to environmental markers, or I was just interested in your ideas.
Okay, I can maybe clarify. Thank you, Teresa. Teresa can. So when we updated the search, we did that because the analysis had taken too long, and that the first search was outdated. We didn't find very much more environmental factors in the new papers. We found one additional paper, which was a thesis that looked at the multisensory components of the medication, and the other paper that looked at material was in our first search. So the table I presented at the very beginning of this seminar is a literature review that I did at the beginning 2 years ago with my proposal in 2018, where I looked at existing theories in social behavioral theories and then marked the areas where those theories responded to. But I do agree with you, even now there is very little emphasis on the environment. There are papers here and there, but health research does lack a lot of emphasis on the environment in their modeling.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Yeah.
Pleasure.
Lynn, I had two interrelated questions for you. One is about your primary pitch of your interest into the environment and then materialism. To me, these two concepts are not the same, but you use them intertwined. So I wanted to hear your opinion about how that might differ. And also, I had a question about what the core purpose of your argument with this review is. So on the one hand, I see you add a category of the material, and that suggests that you want to move towards a more comprehensive model that includes the material. On the other hand, later in your talk, you tend to use the material as a level or a layer that cuts across the other dimensions, which would then suggest that it's more about seeing the other dimensions through the material. To me, these goals are not quite the same. One is more comprehensive, one is more, I would say, almost epistemological, starting from a new way of seeing. So I wondered in the end, where do you want to pitch your review project in the end?
Yeah, thank you for that.
Comprehensive or towards a more different type of epistemological thinking?
Thank you. So for the first question around the environment, I think when I look at the model as it is now, and that's the one that's projected, I have been thinking around whether I add the dimension of the environment here onto the model that's already existing, because the environment as I see it is the physical space around the person, so the community and the space the patient or the young person find themselves in. And I do see I have blended that too a bit in the presentation, but I do see room for it growing as another dimension here onto this model. So thank you for that. And then in the second question around the materialism, I do believe it is something that cuts across all the dimensions. It's not something that can stand on its own. Even when busy with analysis, it was very difficult to mark it on its own as a separate dimension. It had to be cutting across these. This might not even be the final display of the model. It may still evolve over time, but I do see it as something that cuts across. Where I'd like to go with it, I think in terms of health research, is to firstly bring more awareness to health researchers and to health modeling about this layer that has been missing for some time, It's been explored. It is there. I just don't think it has a name. It hasn't yet crossed over as a way of thinking in the health research modeling. So on a epistemological level, I think there's room for growth there in health research. Where the review is going, I do see some room for presenting the review with its findings. So this is what we found, but also maybe a follow-up paper more around the theoretical thinking around what next. I don't yet know what is going to go in that paper, but I do believe it's evolving as the review happens.
Yeah. Any more questions for Lynn?
Hi Lynn, this is Nasreen. Can I ask a question? I had it in the chat, but I suspect you haven't had a chance to look at the chat yet. Super interesting, and I just got a crash course in materiality. Thank you. I was just wondering if you had gone through the literature on social determinants of health, because they talk a lot about different aspects of the environment that you mentioned, but also things like hunger, environmental and safety, income and jobs, mental health, housing, transportation. All of those are part of the deliberations and the models around social determinants of health, and wondering whether you had come across that literature, and if so, how you think it does or does not align with your work. Thank you.
Thanks, Nasreen. I'm going to try to answer that question. I haven't yet, mastered the full art of new materialism, but I'm getting there. But how I've come to understand it is I do have those factors and those determinants in my data set. We do have papers that include those examples that you're talking about, like food and housing and security and violence. And those are listed as social determinants. What I am gathering is that when I when I am gathering the data for social determinants, I can't exactly say that is materialism, because that still puts the human as the center of the focus. And it doesn't really look at the agency or the meaning making behind these material things. I hope I've explained that properly. I'm not 100% there yet.
That's, thank you. Super interesting. Thanks, Lynn. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, so I see where you're coming from.
Thanks, Nasreen. Does anyone have any more questions, comments, suggestions? If you have anything that you come across interesting reading that you'd like to share, please feel free to send them to me. This is a work in progress and it is evolving. So please, if you have anything you'd like to share, resources, please do.
I know, for example, Mathei, you are working quite a newcomer as well in the new materialist tradition. You've probably faced similar struggles on how to get that conceptually and methodologically on board. So you would be a good spokesperson to Lynn if there's any of the theoretical work that you read that might help. Please feel free to share.
I mean, I can send something later if that's it's possible. Yeah. That's not that I have something directly coming up. I did make some notes of the presentation, yeah, I think I especially remember that Lynn's struggle to then try to read into the text about what the agency of the different materials or objects is, and that she comes to her own interpretation by comparing it to a different type of material. So that's my takeaway from today, and I'm happy to discuss later on at another point.
Thanks so much, Maria.
Okay. Good. Maybe we can close off the session from Lynn now and open up to Ellen. We have some problems for the ones based in the Leuven University with the network. So Ellen, can you hear us all right?
I'm gonna try. Yeah, I hear you. I think I'm like well connected now. The thing is like the.
So let's see whether you can share your slides, whether that all works well. If not, I still have problems with the one from Lynn, so I'll activate them.